It was the year 509 BC, according to legend, when Rome's first consuls assumed office. Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus and Lucius Junius Brutus, alleged to be the ancestor of the Brutus who led the assassination of Julius Caesar, collaborated in the newly formed role to take on the responsibility of Rome's burgeoning government following the expulsion of her last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. The Roman people had risen up against King Tarquinius the Proud, whose son, abusing his authority, had sexually assaulted Lucretia, the wife of Collatinus, who afterward killed herself. From 509 BC until the time of the dictatorship of Julius Caesar, consuls were elected to office at a rate of 2 per year, alternating their duties monthly. But that changed dramatically with the dictatorship of Caesar. The consulship then became a gift to be bestowed by the dictator upon his most ardent supporters, such as the man who was elected to the consulship by Caesar, only to serve for the one day remaining in that year. By the time of the reign of the Second Triumvirate, the consulship continued to be the most sought-after prize for adherents, with appointments for the deserving scheduled up to 5 years in advance by the triumvirs. But, with so many supporters between those of Caesar Divi Filius and those of Marcus Antonius promised offices, consuls were often forced to step down after only a few months in favor of the next devotee who was owed the consulship. From 37 BC until the end of 33 BC, a 5-year period which would have traditionally seen only 10 consuls elected, a total of 24 men held the consulship, with 14 of those consuls holding office in 34 and 33 BC alone. The consuls scheduled to commence the 32 BC year were Gnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus and Gaius Sosius, both advocates of Marcus Antonius. Aenobarbus, whose son was betrothed to one of Antonius' daughters, served as naval commander for Marcus Antonius. He was the son of Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, the lifelong enemy of Julius Caesar, who died at Pharsalus. Sosius was the legate who had carried out Antonius' order to help King Herod secure Judea's throne from the pro-Parthian usurper, Antigonus Matathias. With the formal expiration of the triumvirate slated to take place by the end of the 33 BC year, Marcus Antonius made haste to send Aenobarbus and Sosius back to the Senate in mid-33 BC, where the triumvir of the East expected the 32 BC consuls-elect to legislate the Senate's ratification of his recent settlement of the region. At the donations of Alexandria, which had taken place previously in 34 BC, the triumvir Marcus Antonius had peremptorily distributed many of the eastern kingdoms to his children by Egypt's Queen Cleopatra. This included Media Atropatene and Parthia, neither of which belonged to him or to Rome. By placing client kings Polemo in Pontus, Archelaus in Cappadocia, Amyntas in Galatia, and Herod in Judea, as well as by forcing a peace treaty between Iberia's king Pharnabazes and Albania's king Zoba, capturing Armenia's king Artavasdes II, and negotiating a marriage alliance with King Artavasdes I of Media Atropatene, Marcus Antonius had successfully built a strong coalition of Roman client states meant to withstand assault by the kingdom of Parthia. The pomp and ceremony on display at the donations of Alexandria, an event held in the city's large gymnasium, was not for the sake of the people of Rome, but for the benefit of the people of the East, a people accustomed to autocratic rule and unaccustomed to Rome's democratic and deliberative proceedings. The costuming, the golden thrones, and the totality of the splendor, alongside the gifting of kingdoms to his children by Cleopatra, served as an official announcement by Marcus Antonius that this coalition of kingdoms, assembled as a defense against Parthia, was subordinate to Egypt, through whom Rome would control the East. Marcus Antonius reinforced this message by minting coins featuring images of himself and Cleopatra, which would be distributed throughout the East. However, when Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus and Gaius Sosius arrived in Rome in mid-33 BC, they chose to suppress Antonius' attempted ratification of the donations of Alexandria, likely fearing the Senate's response. Under Caesar Divi-Filius, whose influence in the West was far greater than Antonius's, there was a new movement blossoming among the people, subtly engineered by Caesar to undermine Rome's perception of Cleopatra, dragging down with her the reputation of Marcus Antonius. The general consensus in Rome was that Antonius had fallen under the spell of Egypt's Queen Cleopatra, who meant to rule the Roman Empire through him. To try and legislate the ratification of Antonius's eastern settlements, deemed Aenobarbus and Sosius, would be to inadvertently participate in the flourishing anti-Antonius propaganda. Marcus Antonius, in an effort to retain the loyalty of the Roman people, responded to this propaganda by publicly querying Caesar Divi-Filius as to his negative view of Cleopatra. Antonius presented his stance before the people that as triumvir of the East, it was his prerogative to appoint client kings and queens, which he deemed loyal to Rome, as had been done by Pompeius Magnus, Julius Caesar, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and almost every Roman governor stationed in the East. Was he being criticized because Cleopatra was his lover? Why should that matter? Julius Caesar had also taken Cleopatra as his mistress, and Eunoe, the wife of Mauritania's King Bogud, was his mistress as well. Most Roman men had mistresses, including Caesar Divi-Filius, who was himself guilty of multiple counts of adultery. So why bother about Cleopatra now, after the affair had been common knowledge for some 11 years? "And do you lie with only Livia Drusilla?" charged Antonius in a letter to Caesar Divi-Filius. Good luck to you if by the time you shall read this letter you haven't already lain with Tertulla, or Terentilla, or Rutilla, or Salvia Titicinia, or all of them. Perhaps, Antonius suggested, it was Cleopatra's foreignness, to which Caesar Divi-Filius objected. Yet, pointed out Antonius, the same sanctimonious Caesar, while battling in his Illyricum campaigns, had offered his 5-year-old daughter Julia to the foreign king Cotiso of Agati, regardless of the fact that, per the terms of the Tarentum Pact, Julia was already promised in marriage to Antonius's son, Antyllus. But, Antonius continued, Caesar Divi-Filius had not stopped there. All the while untouchably robed in his air of divine righteousness, Caesar Divi-Filius had also asked for one of King Cotiso's daughters, that he might take her as a wife, despite already being married to Livia Drusilla. And who could ignore the fact that, coincidentally, at the close of this same Illyricum campaign, during which Antonius accused Caesar of looking for a new wife, Livia Drusilla's sons had come to live with her following the death of their father. Almost immediately, Livia Drusilla, as if sensing some cause for insecurity, had further entrenched herself in Rome's new Caesarian regime by entering into an alliance with the military muscle behind her husband's success, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Livia betrothed her eldest son Tiberius to Agrippa's daughter, Vipsania Agrippina. Marcus Antonius also condemned Caesar Divi-Filius for his hasty divorce of Scribonia Libo, a wife who dared to complain of her husband's affair. Not only had his selfish action caused the starving people of Rome even more pain and suffering at the hands of Sextus Pompeius, but Antonius lightly pointed out the hypocrisy of Caesar in feigning offence on behalf of his sister, Octavia Verina, when he had done the same to the sister of Lucius Scribonius Libo. Among Antonius's list of charges against Caesar Divi-Filius was the shocking tale that Caesar, having been invited to dine in the home of a consul, had escorted the consul's wife from the dining room into the bedroom, only to return later with, quote, her ears glowing and her hair in disarray. Marcus Antonius also denounced Caesar's friends for assisting him in his many adulteries, naming them as procurers who searched out beautiful women on Caesar's behalf, stripping them naked and inspecting them, as if buying slaves from the market. But, asked Antonius, what could one expect from a man who had paid for his illustrious adoption with sexual favours performed in a now historic carriage ride with Caesar from Munda to Narbo? With such rumours circulating, what right had Caesar Divi-Filius to sit in judgment of Marcus Antonius? Engaging in more of the same mud-slinging campaign begun by his brother-in-law, Marcus Antonius brought into question the possible truth of rumors of paranoia and cruelty associated with Caesar Divi Filius. A young man named Pinarius, listening to a speech given by Caesar Divi Filius to a group of soldiers, had begun taking notes. Accusing Pinarius of being a spy, Caesar had ordered the young man stabbed to death on the spot. Antonius had further accused Caesar of hurling such vehement threats at Tedius Afer, a consul-elect who happened to be a partisan supporter of Antonius, that Afer had thrown himself down from atop a cliff. Antonius also alleged that Caesar Divi Filius, suspecting a praetor named Quintus Gallius of hiding a sword beneath his toga, had ordered his lictors to take Gallius away, where the Roman citizen was then tortured like a slave. Before his death, Gallius, who actually had only a writing tablet tucked inside his toga, lost both of his eyes to the honor of having them personally gouged out by Caesar Divi Filius himself. Caesar denied the charge, claiming that Quintus Gallius, after asking for an interview, had attacked the triumvir, at which point Gallius was only taken into custody. After being legally charged with attempted violence against a Roman magistrate and exiled from Rome, Quintus Gallius, quote, boarded a ship and was nowhere seen again, indicating that he may have died in shipwreck or may have fallen prey to Mediterranean pirates. But Quintus Gallius was not the only person to mysteriously disappear after a run-in with Caesar Divi Filius. Following Caesar's victory over Marcus Aemilius Lepidus in Sicily, a military tribune who tried to incite Caesar's legions against him disappeared the next day, and it was not known what became of him. This blameless and holier-than-thou Caesar Divi Filius seemed to do whatever he wished with impunity, pointed out Antonius, including failure following the Sicilian War and the defeat of Sextus Pompeius, to return to Marcus Antonius the 120 warships he had borrowed, or to send to Antonius the 20,000 legionaries that had been negotiated as payment for the warships. Nor had Caesar shared the plunder of his Sicilian victory with Marcus Antonius, as specified in the Pact of Tarentum. The warning label pasted on Caesar Divi Filius by Marcus Antonius was clear. Caesar, who had lately begun making promises to return power to the Senate at the close of the triumvirate, had no intention of stepping down from office. It was all just talk. Besides controlling all the legions of Gaul, Hispania, Illyricum, Sicily, and Africa, Caesar had a vast fleet which had been built by Marcus Agrippa in the secret location known as the Portus Julius. Marcus Antonius highlighted the fact that in the East, as a benefit of his relationship with Cleopatra, he needed no official office to derive authority. He could control the East in an unofficial capacity. But in the West, Caesar Divi Filius only had power so long as he held office. There was a Senate full of men just waiting for him to step down, so they could pounce. Caesar Divi Filius, despite flowery words, would never restore the Republic. How could he? To lose the imperium associated with his office would be suicide. Caesar retaliated by insinuating to the Roman people that Marcus Antonius had gone native. At the banquet Antonius ordered to celebrate Publius Ventidius' defeat of the Parthian invaders, Antonius was reported to have arrived wearing Greek robes and white shoes, brandishing the official wand of the Greek leader known as the Gymnasiarch, rather than wearing his toga, the traditional garb of Rome's office. In response to the allegation that he had failed to share the booty of Sicily with Antonius, Caesar Divi Filius announced he would gladly share the spoils, just as soon as Marcus Antonius sent to him his half of the spoils from Armenia. But not only had Caesar seen no shared spoils from Armenia, Rome's treasury had received none of its tribute from the East since Marcus Antonius had taken control. While on the subject of Armenia, Caesar Divi Filius let it be known that by holding King Artavasdes II captive, and by demanding that all of Armenia's treasuries and temples be thrown open while a knife was pressed to the king's throat, Marcus Antonius had done a huge disservice to the external reputation of Rome. The backstabbing snowballed as Marcus Antonius accused Caesar Divi Filius of having placed spies within the ranks of his legions, and having used them to communicate with the treacherous Artavasdes II, advising Armenia's king to withdraw his 6,000 cataphracts and cavalry, specifically so that Marcus Antonius would fail at Phraates. Antonius reminded Romans that such behavior should be no surprise, considering how quickly Caesar Divi Filius had turned against the third triumvir, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Although it seemed as if Marcus Antonius's counter-propaganda was beginning to take hold of the people of Rome, bringing to light all the sins and hypocrisies of Caesar Divi Filius, an unexpected turn of events shifted popular opinion away from Marcus Antonius. One of Antonius's legates, Lucius Munatius Plancus, along with his nephew Marcus Titius, defected to Caesar Divi Filius. Allegedly outraged at Cleopatra's high-handedness and Marcus Antonius's refusal to disregard her, Plancus and Titius arrived in Rome, delivering even more fodder for Caesar's anti-Antonian propaganda machine. Plancus accused Antonius of sitting on the floor during meetings, rubbing Cleopatra's aching feet in front of his men. He alleged that while overseeing a legal case, Antonius simply stood up and walked away if, perchance, he were to notice Cleopatra's litter pass by in the distance. Uncle and nephew also informed Caesar Divi Filius that Marcus Antonius had gifted to Cleopatra the great library at Pergamon as compensation for the parts of Alexandria's library which had been burned during Julius Caesar's war in Alexandria. But the most damning evidence against Marcus Antonius, Plancus informed Caesar Divi Filius, was in the triumvir's last will and testament. Plancus had signed the will as a witness, and had travelled to Rome at the order of Antonius to insert the document into the Vestal Virgin's repository for safekeeping. A man's will was sacrosanct, not to be opened until after his death. Caesar, whose wife and sister were now honorary Vestal Virgins, went to the house of the Vestals by armed escort. There, he demanded the will of Marcus Antonius from the head Vestal, who refused his request. However, though she made it clear she would not assist Caesar Divi Filius in his blasphemy, lest she also fall under judgment, there was nothing she could do to prevent him and his guards from simply taking what they wanted, though the results be upon his own head. With his guards, Caesar invaded the house of the Vestals and procured the will. Taking it home, he spent the entire night reading it and highlighting passages before calling a meeting of the Senate for the following morning. Scandalizing the entire Senate, Caesar announced that he had stolen the will of Marcus Antonius, cracked its seal, and knew its content, which he then read to the Senate. Besides reaffirming Antonius' previous statement that Cleopatra's son, Ptolemy, was the natural-born son and legal heir of Julius Caesar, Marcus Antonius also named his children by Cleopatra, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus as his own rightful heirs, and made no reference to his daughter Antonia by his first wife, his sons Iulus and Antyllus, born to Fulvia Flacca Bambula, or to his two Antonias, born to Caesar's sister Octavia. Along with various gifts to friends and supporters, Antonius also addressed the preparations for his funeral. When he died, whether in the East or in Rome, Antonius gave strict instructions that his body be returned to Cleopatra in Alexandria and be made ready for mummification and burial. But the most damning part of Marcus Antonius's will, the part which settled the Senate's distress over Caesar Divi Filius's decision to broach the document, was Antonius's bequeathal of the entire Roman Empire to Cleopatra of Alexandria. After spending an entire night, alone, poring over the contents of Marcus Antonius's last will and testament, Caesar Divi Filius finally produced exactly what he needed to convince the Roman Senate that he had been right all along. Cleopatra had been striving to hold the title to Rome. On January 1st of the 32 BC year, Gnaeus Domitius Aenobarbus and Gaius Sosius began their consular terms. We are told that Sosius and Aenobarbus spoke in defense of Marcus Antonius before the Senate, and openly criticized Caesar Divi Filius, likely on account of Caesar's forbidden opening of Antonius's will. As the new consul spoke, Caesar Divi Filius arrived at the meeting. Surrounded by his praetorian bodyguard, Caesar took his seat next to the consuls, where he made such sinister threats that Aenobarbus and Sosius fled Rome, along with approximately 40% of the Senate, with almost half the Senate fleeing to Marcus Antonius in the east and the other half remaining in Italy with Caesar Divi Filius. Rome's government, as in the days before the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompeius Magnus, was once again split. There was no avoiding it. War between Antonius and Caesar was now certain.